kind of want my boyfriend, M35, to be my dad. The title of my story gives off a bit of a creepy vibe, doesn't it? The reality, though, isn't creepy. It's complicated. My boyfriend and I have been together for only 6 months, but our friendship stretches back over a year beyond that. We started as friends, meeting in a casual way through our shared group of friends, and often bonding over things like Dungeons and Dragons. Our connection grew gradually, not from being alone together or intimately learning each other's lives in a private sense, but through the shared experiences that unfold in a friendly group setting. There was no rush. At the time, we were simply two people laughing over dice rolls, planning character backstories, and enjoying little adventures within our imaginary world. I fell for him in a way that felt natural, organic, and deeply unexpected. I fell in love with him without knowing what his day-to-day life looked like, without spending time at his house, and without really interacting with his children. For all that time, they were just little echoes in the background of his life, things he would mention here and there, almost as a side note. I knew they existed. A 7-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter, but they were not a part of my emotional landscape back then. It was just him, this person who made me laugh, who intrigued me, who drew me in. By the time I had my first real encounter with his kids, I was already deeply in love with him, and nothing could have changed that. But this story runs deeper than just us. It involves a part of my life I rarely share. My childhood wasn't ordinary, and it left me with scars I'm still trying to heal. I grew up in a home filled with darkness and instability. Both of my parents were emotionally and psychologically abusive. My father was more than just difficult. He was violent. He had a hair-trigger temper, and he drank heavily, often enough that it seemed to fuel his anger. Our home was filled with the constant dread of his next outburst, which would often end in him throwing things or punching walls. My mother, instead of being a shelter from his storm, seemed like she was battling her own, and I don't think she ever truly saw me. I became an expert at staying quiet, invisible even, trying not to draw attention to myself in hopes of avoiding his wrath. It's like I grew up always walking on eggshells, waiting for something to shatter. My memories are colored by the constant awareness of how quickly things could go wrong. As I grew up and could afford it, I went to therapy, dipping in and out of it as my finances allowed. Therapy was like a lifeline, a way to process what I'd been through, even if it didn't magically erase it. And while it helped me see that my upbringing wasn't normal, it didn't prepare me for the shock of seeing a truly healthy family dynamic. Therapy is wonderful, don't get me wrong, but there's a limit to what words alone can do. My therapist could explain a loving family dynamic in theory, but understanding something and experiencing it are two very different things. When I finally visited my boyfriend's house, I walked in carrying all that baggage, all that past trauma, even though I didn't fully realize it at the time. That first visit was an eye-opener for me. His son was in a mood, acting up in the way only kids do. Loud, boundary-pushing, full of sass, and maybe just a little bit of sugar-fueled energy. Instinctively, I felt myself tense up. My whole body seemed to go rigid as I braced myself for what I assumed would come next. I was so used to anger being the immediate response to any kind of disruption that I felt a surge of anxiety rise within me, anticipating yelling or slamming, that dark cloud I grew up with. But the anger didn't come. Instead, my boyfriend was calm, collected, and so gentle. He didn't shout. He didn't tense up or raise his voice. Instead, he knelt down, looked his son in the eye, and talked to him in a soothing voice that was patient, understanding, and entirely without judgment. It was like witnessing some foreign ritual, one I'd only read about or seen in movies. It was shocking. I don't even think I was fully aware of the breath I'd been holding until I let it out, feeling the tension dissolve in a way that felt alien and wonderful. I realized that I was in the presence of something I'd never experienced before, a truly kind and caring parent. And it wasn't a one-time thing. The more I spent time at his place, the more I saw it. Every interaction between him and his kids was filled with patience and warmth. I was observing a father who genuinely, deeply loved his children, who saw them as unique little beings deserving of respect and understanding. Each time he spoke to them, each time he handled their squabbles, questions, and frustrations with grace, it was like a window opening, a fresh breeze blowing through a house that had been locked up for years. I was truly seeing what a loving family dynamic looked like, and I couldn't believe how foreign it felt to me. It's strange how certain things can trigger deep emotional responses, things you didn't even know you'd buried. As I sat there in his living room, witnessing him be this incredibly loving and patient father, I felt something unearth itself inside me. Something primal, raw, and aching. It was as though every gentle word he spoke to his kids was somehow directed at a part of me that had been starved for so long. I found myself wanting to soak it up, to absorb all the goodness radiating from him, almost like a thirsty plant leaning toward the sun. For the first time in my life, I felt safe in a house with a man, felt safe watching him interact with his family, and that feeling was as terrifying as it was beautiful. I started looking forward to those moments, Spending time at his house became a source of warmth and comfort. Each time I witnessed his kindness, it felt like a balm, soothing parts of me that were still raw from the past. I felt like I was passively absorbing his gentleness, that by simply being near it, I was being healed in some profound, fundamental way. It was as though his love and patience were stretching out beyond his kids, beyond the walls of his house, and wrapping around me too. There's something so primal about wanting to be safe, to feel protected, and in those moments, I felt wrapped up in a feeling that I had never known at home, a feeling I struggled to put into words, one that was overwhelming, soft, and strangely healing. But it's not easy to reconcile those feelings. I found myself thinking more and more about what it meant, about what I wanted. I knew about concepts like Daddy Kink and DDLG, but this was not sex. It wasn't about desire or romance. It was about something much deeper, something almost childlike, something that went beyond romantic love. I wasn't looking for a father figure in the way those terms imply, but there was a part of me that craved the kind of unconditional love and protection I had missed out on as a child. I wanted to feel safe and cherished, the way his children, and I struggled with whether or not that was okay, if it was something I should even admit to myself, let alone to him. I wondered, was it wrong to want this from my boyfriend, to hope that his warmth could extend to me, to wish for that same gentle acceptance? My boyfriend knew some of my past, knew that I'd cut ties with my family and didn't have any close relatives in my life. I'd shared bits and pieces with him, not because I wanted sympathy, but because it was a part of who I was. He understood, to some degree, because he hadn't had a perfect childhood either. We shared that unspoken bond of knowing what it was like to come from fractured backgrounds, to understand trauma without needing it explained. He wasn't someone I felt I had to hide things from, but even with that openness between us, I was unsure if I could ever bring up these feelings with him. There were times I'd be watching him play with his kids or talk to them about their day, and I would find myself overcome with emotion. One night, he was telling me about his custody battle, how his ex-wife had tried to keep him out of his children's lives, and how he had fought tooth and nail to remain a part of their world. Listening to him, I felt tears welling up, and I tried to hide them, but they spilled over anyway. He noticed and gently asked what was wrong. I remember blurting out, "I wish I'd had a dad like you," and feeling immediately vulnerable and exposed. He looked at me with such compassion, without an ounce of judgment, and said, "I wish you did too." There was something so simple and pure in those words, and they meant the world to me. But even with that kindness, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't something I should want from him. His love, his warmth, it belonged to his children. They were his, and it wasn't my place to want a piece of that for myself. The more time I spend with him and his two kids, the more I feel like I'm watching something sacred and profound unfold right in front of me. It's a revelation, really. One that shakes me to my core each time it happens. I see him interact with his children in ways that are so foreign to me that they almost feel surreal, like watching a scene from a movie. My mind is filled with these new and almost shocking realizations, things I'm still learning to put into words. This, I think to myself, is what real love and security look like. This is what parenting should be, what it's supposed to be. In therapy, my counselors explained to me what healthy parenting should look like. They would talk about boundaries, respect, and the importance of a loving environment where children feel safe to express themselves. But no amount of words can compare to seeing it play out in real life. Therapy gave me ideas to understand, but they were just concepts, things I couldn't fully imagine because I had never lived them. So even as I nodded in agreement with my therapists, a part of me couldn't grasp the full picture. I intellectually understood the concept of healthy family dynamics, but that understanding was only skin deep, a paper-thin layer over the vast, empty chasm of my own experiences. Now, seeing my boyfriend around his kids, I feel like that chasm is slowly being filled, piece by piece. Watching him with his children, how he listens, how he respects their thoughts and feelings, even when they're acting up, feels like a balm for something inside me that has long been aching. When I watch him, I feel something I've rarely felt in my life, safe. It's an all-encompassing, visceral sensation that fills me with warmth. I feel cocooned in his presence, like I could finally relax. Finally let my guard down in a way that I have never been able to do before. It's an overwhelming sense of protection, almost primal in its intensity. I think back to my own childhood and realize that this feeling, this sense of being surrounded by kindness and love, was entirely absent from my life growing up. In those quiet moments, just watching him be gentle and patient, I feel like I'm soaking up something I've always needed but never had. It's almost as if his kindness is seeping into the cracks within, filling spaces I didn't even know were empty. When he speaks softly to his children, when he encourages them or comforts them after a bad day, I feel this overwhelming sense of peace, like I'm witnessing something pure and irreplaceable. It's as though I am a dry sponge, absorbing every bit of his warmth and tenderness, drinking it in, letting it replenish parts of me that have been starved for so long. These moments are quiet and ordinary, things that would probably seem unremarkable to anyone else, but to me, they feel monumental. When I watch him guide his son through a frustration or help his daughter with her homework, I feel like I am witnessing tiny miracles, moments of gentle care that seem to defy everything I knew about what a family could be. I find myself wondering if this is how all families should feel, if this is what I missed, growing up in a home where love was conditional, fleeting, and almost always tinged with fear. For the first time in my life, I feel a glimmer of understanding for what it might mean to feel loved unconditionally. It's not something I can claim for myself, but even as an observer, it feels like a blessing. I feel grateful to simply be in the presence of such a love, to watch it unfold between him and his children, to witness how they respond to him with a level of trust and security that I've never known. It's a strange feeling to feel grateful for something that isn't even yours. But that's exactly how I feel. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish for wanting to be close to this warmth. Is it right to long for something that isn't mine to have? I feel like an outsider, intruding on a world that is beautiful but not meant for. And yet, every time I see him with his children, I feel this magnetic pull, a yearning that I can't quite ignore. I feel like I am orbiting around this radiant center of love and warmth, drawn in, but knowing I can't claim it for myself. It's his children's world, a world where they can feel safe and cherished, and I am merely a guest. Despite my reservations, I find myself looking forward to these visits. Each time I'm there, I feel a little more at ease, a little more secure. It's as if his home has become a sanctuary for me, a place where I can momentarily set down the weight of my past and simply exist in the presence of kindness. I have never known a house like his, a home where laughter echoes through the rooms, where love isn't something that has to be earned, where mistakes are met with patience instead of anger. There's something healing about being in that space, even if it isn't mine, even if I'm only borrowing it for a little while. And my boyfriend, whether he knows it or not, has become an anchor for me in ways I never expected. His warmth, his patience, his unconditional love for his children, all of it feels like a steady hand, holding me, grounding me. I know he is there for his kids, not for me, but being near that kind of stability feels like a lifeline. It's as though he is showing me, in real time, what it means to love and be loved without conditions or expectations. It's something I've only dreamed of, something I didn't even know could be real. There are times when I feel this overwhelming urge to thank him, to let him know how much this means to me, even if it isn't intentional on his part. He probably doesn't realize the impact he's having just by being who he is, just by loving his children in the way that he does. It's a quiet kind of gift, one that I don't know how to repay, one that I feel undeserving of in a strange way. And yet, it fills me with a gratitude that is so deep, so profound, that sometimes I feel like I might burst with it. I know I'm an adult. I know I'm not a child anymore. And that this yearning for safety, for a loving parent figure, isn't something I should be seeking in my boyfriend. I worry sometimes that these feelings might be wrong, that wanting this closeness to his warmth and love might blur lines in ways that aren't healthy. But then I remind myself that these feelings are just a reflection of what I've been through. They're not a judgment on me, nor do they define my relationship with him. They are simply echoes of a past where love was absent, a natural response to finally seeing, for the first time, what love is supposed to look like. And so, for now, I allow myself to simply be present, to let these moments fill me in a way that I have never known. I don't know what the future holds or how long this phase will last, but I know that I need this, even if only to heal parts of myself that were left bruised and broken long ago. I remind myself that there's nothing wrong with wanting to be safe, with seeking comfort in a place that feels warm and kind. It's essential to clarify what I'm feeling because I know that it might sound strange or even inappropriate from the outside. I'm aware of concepts like daddy kink or DDLG, daddy dom little girl, and this isn't that at all. This has nothing to do with sexuality or any kind of romantic fantasy. My longing isn't about trying to get my boyfriend to act as a father figure in a way that crosses boundaries or skews into the romantic. Instead, it's more about a deep, unmet need for nurturing and protection, a yearning to experience, even secondhand, what it feels like to be genuinely cared for by someone you trust. It's the longing of a child that still exists somewhere inside, the one who never experienced what it felt like to be protected or fought for. The realization came into sharp focus one night as we were talking on the couch, just the two of us. He started opening up about the intense custody battle he had gone through with his ex-wife, who had tried to keep him out of his children's lives. He recounted the struggle in detail, describing how hard he fought in court, how he refused to back down, how every ounce of his energy went into ensuring that he could stay in his children's lives. He wasn't just recounting a story, he was baring his heart, exposing a chapter of his life that had been painful, exhausting, and profoundly transformative. He spoke of how he'd driven hours back and forth to meet every court date, to comply with every condition, to show the judge and his ex-wife that he wasn't going to give up. Every sacrifice he made, every late night, every dollar spent, all of it was fueled by his love for his children and his determination to be there for them, no matter the cost. As I listened to him, something deep inside me started to unravel. I felt a well of emotions rising up that I could barely contain. He was talking about fighting for his kids, about refusing to let them go, and the intensity of it all hit me in a way I hadn't anticipated. In that moment, it was as if I was hearing about a kind of love I had only ever dreamed of, a love that fights, protects, and sacrifices. I felt an ache, sharp and undeniable, and before I knew it, I was crying. It wasn't just a few tears either. It was an uncontrollable release, a flood of emotion that spilled over, no matter how hard I tried to keep it in. My boyfriend looked at me, a little taken aback, but his face softened almost immediately. He put his arm around me, his hand warm on my shoulder, offering comfort in that gentle way he has. He didn't ask for an explanation right away. He simply held me, letting me feel what I needed to feel, not rushing me or demanding that I make sense of it for him. When I could finally speak, I tried to explain why I was so emotional, fumbling over my words, embarrassed but unable to stop myself. I told him that no one had ever fought for me like that I couldn't even imagine someone wanting to stay in my life with that level of determination. I told him in the quietest voice, I wish I'd had a dad like you. It was a strange, raw truth, one I hadn't even fully realized until that moment. I hadn't intended to say it. The words just came out, an honest expression of the sadness and longing that had been buried for so long. He looked at me with such compassion that it almost broke me all over again. His response was simple, but it meant the world to me. He said, I wish you did too. There was no pity in his voice. No awkwardness, just a genuine understanding of what I had been through. He didn't make me feel ashamed for wanting something I had never had. He didn't try to offer empty platitudes or dismiss my feelings. Instead, he validated them, meeting me where I was with an empathy that made me feel seen in a way that was both comforting and heartbreaking. That moment has stayed with me, lingering in my mind, a quiet but profound memory that I return to often. It was one of the few times in my life where I felt truly understood without having to explain myself a dozen different ways. There was a part of me that was afraid to admit these feelings to him, worried that he might see them as strange or inappropriate, but he didn't. He got it. He got me, and I think that's partly because he didn't have an easy upbringing either. While our experiences weren't identical, he had known his own version of hardship, and that gave him a unique insight into my pain. I think about that night often, about how he responded and how I felt afterward. And yet, even as I find comfort in his understanding, I can't shake the worry that maybe I shouldn't be feeling this way toward him. I ask myself if it's wrong to want that kind of love, that kind of protection from my boyfriend. It's not that I see him as a replacement father. It's not that simple or clear-cut. It's more about craving a type of care that I never experienced. I long to be loved in that way. Not as a child, not as a romantic part, but just as a person who deserves to be fought for, protected, and cherished. But I'm left questioning whether it's appropriate to want this from someone who is, after all, my partner and not my parent. I wonder if it's possible to separate these two things. My desire for romantic love and my yearning for that parental, protective kind of love. It's hard to know where one ends and the other begins. And sometimes I'm afraid that I might be crossing some invisible line, letting these feelings get tangled up in ways that they shouldn't. But then, in quieter moments, I remind myself that this isn't a failure of boundaries or clarity. It's simply the result of a life that lacked the foundation of love and care that most people take for granted. It's my inner child reaching out, still hoping to be held, still hoping to find a place of warmth and security. Even though I try to analyze these feelings, sometimes all I can do is sit with them. I know that they aren't going to vanish overnight, and maybe they don't need to. I am learning slowly that it's okay to have complex emotions, that I don't need to box everything up neatly or justify every feeling. My boyfriend's response that night gave me a glimpse into a kind of acceptance that I didn't know was possible. His words, "I wish you did too," were an acknowledgement of my pain, but also of my worth. He didn't think I was wrong for wanting this, for feeling this. Instead, he let me be vulnerable, without shame or judgment. It has made me reflect on what I need and what I'm allowed to want, even if those needs and wants don't fit into conventional categories. I'm learning that just because I didn't have that protective love as a child doesn't mean I'm broken or that I'm incapable of experiencing it in other forms as an adult. Maybe it's okay that my relationship with my boyfriend contains layers that are unique to us. He's not just my partner, He's also my friend, my confidant, and, in a strange way, a teacher who is showing me, simply by being who he is, what it means to love without reservation. His love isn't limited to a role or a title. It's a presence that fills the room, a warmth that I feel whenever I'm near him. I know there's more work for me to do. I know that I can't simply rely on him to fill all the empty spaces within me. I still need to process my past, to confront those wounds, perhaps one day with the help of a therapist again. But for now, I'm grateful for what he has given me, even unintentional. His gentle, caring nature has shown me a path toward healing that I never thought was possible. It's like I'm beginning to understand that love isn't something I have to steal or beg for. It's something that I can be worthy of, simply by existing. I keep coming back to the same thought. It's probably not okay to cross these wires, to let my feelings get tangled up in ways that might blur boundaries. I know my desire for safety, for warmth and care, is entirely understandable given my past. But I also recognize that wanting these things from my boyfriend, a person who is both a partner and a father, could complicate our relationship if I'm not careful. There's a part of me that feels it would be best to address this openly, to have an honest conversation about the emotions swirling inside me. I believe deeply in communication. I know that honesty is the bedrock of any healthy relationship, but the question is, how do I explain this without making it sound strange or unsettling? How do I let him know that I am drawn to the love in his home, to the kind of father he is, without it coming off in a way that might make him uncomfortable? It feels like a delicate line to walk. I know he cares for me deep. He's shown me in countless ways, big and small, that his love for me is real. And yet, this feeling, the longing to be under the umbrella of his kindness and protection in the same way his children are, feels difficult to express without potentially shifting our dynamic in a way I'm not sure I can fully control. His home is full of a positivity, warmth, and unconditional love that I have never experienced. And sometimes, it feels like the most natural thing in the world to want to wrap myself in it, to feel sheltered by it. But I know, too, that this home, this warmth, it isn't really mine. It belongs to his children, to the family he's built with them, to the space they share together, and I'm just an invited guest. I can witness it, appreciate it, even be comforted by it in a way. But I have to remind myself that it's not something I can or should try to claim, and that's where the fear comes in. I worry that if I don't find a way to clarify these feelings, to put words to them, they might grow unchecked, leading to confusion or even resentment down the line. I don't want to unconsciously place him in a role he never agreed to fill, nor do I want to expect something from him that's outside the scope of what's fair in a romantic relationship. If things were different, if I hadn't had to change jobs during COVID and could still afford therapy, I would probably be talking this out with a professional. I would be peeling back these layers, examining my motives, exploring the parts of me that feel so fragile and childlike. Therapy was always a place where I could dissect these kinds of feelings, where I could figure out what was rooted in my past trauma and what was part of my present reality. But with finances being tight, therapy isn't an option right now. So instead, I am left with my own thoughts, my own attempts at introspection, and a desire to make sense of it all without accidentally causing harm or misunderstanding in my relationship. After weeks of mulling it over, I finally decided that I needed to talk to him. I had to tell him, to put these tangled thoughts into words no matter how vulnerable it made me feel. I rehearsed what I might say, going over it in my head like a script. I told myself that it was okay to be honest, that he had already shown me, time and again, that he was someone who could handle my truths. Still, my stomach churned with anxiety, and my heart pounded with a fear that maybe, somehow, this would change things between us. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed and the house was quiet, I found the courage to bring it up. We were sitting together on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, and I took a deep breath, summoning the words I'd been holding back. I started by telling him how much I admired his relationship with his kids, how watching him be a father had changed me in ways I never expected. I told him about my past, about the lack of warmth and safety in my own childhood, and how witnessing his kindness had been like discovering something I'd never known could exist. He listened intently, his expression soft and open, his hand gently squeezing mine as I spoke. I tried to explain that sometimes I felt this deep yearning to be a part of that warmth, to feel protected the way he protected his children, even though I knew that it wasn't entirely appropriate to want that from him. I told him that I sometimes worried that my longing for comfort and care might cross lines in ways that I didn't intend. I admitted finally that I wasn't even sure if these feelings made sense, only that they were there, and I wanted him to know. When I finished, there was a pause, a quiet, vulnerable silence that felt both heavy and liberating. I held my breath, waiting for his response, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and relief. He turned to me, his eyes full of understanding, and gently brushed a stray tear from my cheek. "Thank you for telling," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. I can only imagine how hard that was to say. He paused, as if gathering his thoughts, and then continued. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting that kind of love. After everything you've been through, it makes perfect sense that you'd feel this way. You went so long without having anyone to protect you, and that leaves a mark. It's only natural to want a safe place now. He didn't pull away or act uncomfortable. Instead, he leaned in closer, holding me a little tighter. I care about you deeply, he said, his voice filled. And while I can't be the father you never had, I can be here for you in the ways that matter. I want you to feel safe. I want you to know that you are worthy of love and protection, not because you have to earn it, but just because you are who you are. His words washed over me, soothing the raw, aching parts inside. He made it clear that he understood my need without feeling pressured to fulfill a role that wasn't his to take on. There was no judgment, no awkwardness, just a genuine desire to make me feel secure in our relation. In that moment, I felt an incredible sense of relief. I realized that I didn't need to compartmentalize my feelings or force them into neat categories. My need for safety and love could coexist with our romantic bond, and it didn't have to compromise our relationship. He wasn't there to replace my father. He was there as my partner, as someone who cared deeply about my healing, who wanted to help me feel whole in a way that was honest and loving. In the days that followed, I felt lighter, more at peace. I still carried the scars of my past, but they felt less burdensome, less defining. I knew that this journey wasn't over, that I still had work to do to reconcile those old wounds, but I also knew that I wasn't alone. I had a partner who understood the complexities of my heart, who was willing to walk this path with, offering his warmth without conditions, without expectations. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real love is. A willingness to hold space for each other's broken pieces, to embrace not only the easy parts, but also the complicated, messy ones. I didn't need him to fill the role of a parent. I simply needed him to be there, to see me, to let me be vulnerable without fear. And in doing that, he had given me a kind of healing I never thought I could find. I knew that I would keep working toward finding my own inner peace, that I would continue learning to accept love without fear or hesitation. And as I looked at him that night, watching him smile at me with that steady, unwavering kindness, I felt something within me start to heal. For the first time, I believed that I could be part of a love that wasn't tainted by the darkness of my past, a love that was simply good. So, as I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling his warmth envelop me, I closed my eyes and let myself relax into the moment. I allowed myself to feel safe, knowing that this love, this beautiful, complex, imperfect love, was mine to keep. And for the first time, that was enough.